A snowy night had settled over Detroit when a frightened little girl clutched her teddy bear and whispered into the phone, "Please help my sister." On the other end of the line, a 911 operator froze as the child's words cut through the silence. What the police uncovered inside that old apartment would test the strength of a family, the loyalty of a German shepherd named Max, and the power of faith itself. What followed is a story of fear, healing, and the miracle of second chances. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story travels. And if you believe every child deserves to be heard and protected, hit that subscribe button because what you're about to hear might change the way you see the world. The late autumn winds of Detroit swept through the city like a restless spirit, carrying with them the mingled scent of rust, fried food, and rain-soaked asphalt. In a worn-down apartment block on the west side, the hallways were narrow and dimly lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs. Paint peeled from the walls in long, curling strips, and the tiled floors stayed perpetually cold no matter how many blankets the tenants shoved under their doors to keep the draft away. The city outside never really slept. Trains screeched along elevated tracks, distant sirens rose and fell, and the muted bass of passing cars trembled through the windows. Inside apartment 4B, the Miller family tried to carve out a life in the middle of the city's grit and noise. 7-year-old Emma Miller lay in bed, her small frame curled beneath a thin blanket that had faded from pink to gray over the years. Emma was a delicate child with long brown hair that always seemed to tangle no matter how carefully her mother brushed it, pale skin that flushed easily when she was embarrassed, and wide blue eyes that never quite lost their cautious look. Though only 7, Emma carried herself with a maturity born of fear. She had seen things too heavy for her age. She loved her younger sister fiercely, always watching over Lily as if she were a tiny bird that might break at the slightest mishandling. Emma's world had become a constant balance between fear and responsibility, a child who wanted to play but too often found herself acting as the silent guardian of her sibling. 5-year-old Lily Miller, Emma's little sister, was the opposite in temperament. Lily had a round face still soft with baby fat, hair of golden brown that curled slightly at the ends, and large green eyes that sparkled with curiosity when she was healthy. She was prone to illness, fevers rising without much warning, and her frail health made her mother overly protective. Despite this, Lily had a gentle, trusting soul. Her soft voice was often filled with questions, and she clung tightly to her stuffed teddy bear, its ear torn and its fur worn thin from years of love. Lily's innocence was the anchor Emma clung to, the reason she stayed alert at night when shadows stretched too long in their apartment. Their mother, Sophia Miller, was a woman of 32 whose face revealed both resilience and fatigue. She had straight chestnut hair often pulled into a bun for her work at a local diner, faint lines around her eyes from sleepless nights, and a figure that had grown lean from long hours on her feet. Sophia was once cheerful and quick to laugh, but years of struggle single motherhood after her first husband left, financial hardship, and the burden of raising 2 daughters had carved a permanent gravity into her demeanor. She loved her girls deeply, though exhaustion often softened her warmth into a quiet, almost invisible care. At night, she worked late shifts, leaving her daughters under the watch of her second husband, Robert. Robert Hayes, their stepfather, was a man in his mid-30s, tall with a wiry build, dark hair cut short, and perpetually tired eyes that were shadowed by dark circles. He wore plain clothes, often jeans, and a simple shirt, but carried himself with the stiffness of someone always aware he was being observed. To outsiders, Robert was quiet and polite, though not overly friendly, keeping to himself and speaking in short sentences. Around the children, he seemed distant, never cruel, but rarely affectionate, his attempts at care awkward and stiff. Sophia often told herself that Robert was simply a man who had never been good with words, someone shaped by his own difficult upbringing, though sometimes even she questioned if her children truly felt safe in his presence. There was also Max, the German shepherd, 5 years old, with a thick coat of black and tan fur, a powerful muscular build, and sharp amber eyes that rarely blinked when he was watching. Max had been adopted by Sophia a year earlier, originally meant to provide protection in their rough neighborhood. Yet he quickly became more than a guard dog. He bonded with the girls, especially Emma, who trusted him in ways she sometimes struggled to trust adults. Max was fiercely loyal, intelligent, and perceptive to changes in emotion. He had a way of stepping between Emma and anything that frightened her. Ears pricked forward, body tense, his protective instincts honed to perfection. For Emma, Max was not just a dog, he was a shield, a friend, and a source of courage when her small body trembled with fear. That night in Detroit, the wind whistled through the cracks in the apartment's old windows. The building seemed to breathe uneasily, each creak of its pipes like a whisper in the silence. Emma stirred awake when she heard it. A muffled sob, faint but persistent, the kind of sound that seeped through walls and gripped the heart of a child already attuned to danger. She sat up, her hair sticking to her damp forehead, and clutched her blanket tighter around her thin shoulders. The sob came again, mixed with a soft groan, and Emma knew it was Lily. Her bare feet touched the icy tiles, sending a shiver up her small frame. She padded softly through the hallway, its length stretching impossibly far in the dim glow of the flickering bulb overhead. The hallway smelled of mildew and machine oil, the air heavy and stale. On the floor lay Lily's teddy bear, its ear frayed, damp from sweat or tears. Emma picked it up, holding it against her chest as if it could protect her. She reached the slightly ajar door of Lily's room, a thin strip of yellow light spilling into the darkness. Carefully, Emma peered through the crack. Inside, Lily sat curled on the bed, her cheeks flushed and hair plastered to her forehead from fever. The strap of her nightgown had slipped, baring her small shoulder. Robert sat at the edge of the mattress, leaning close, his voice low and raspy. "Take another sip. The towel will help cool you down." He held a damp cloth in one hand, hovering it near her forehead, but not quite touching, his movements careful, but oddly stiff. To Emma's frightened eyes, shaped by past trauma, the scene twisted into something far more sinister. Her breath caught in her throat. For a split second, Robert's eyes lifted and met hers through the crack in the door. There was no anger there, only surprise, but the moment was enough. Robert stood quickly and slammed the door shut, the lock turning with a harsh metallic scrape. The sound echoed in Emma's chest like a memory she could not control, memories of her biological father yelling, doors slamming, her mother's cries drowned out by silence. Emma froze, her heart pounding so violently she thought it might burst. Max appeared silently at her side, his ears pricked, fur raised along his spine. He pressed against Emma's legs, steadying her as she trembled. Then he moved forward, standing directly in front of Lily's closed door, his body low, teeth bared, a growl rumbling deep in his throat. Emma clutched the teddy bear tighter, her knuckles white, before fleeing into the living room where the old landline sat on a dusty shelf. Her fingers slipped against the plastic buttons as she dialed 911, sweat beading across her forehead. When the operator answered, calm and steady, Emma's voice cracked but held. "My stepdad. He took off my sister's nightgown. Please help her." The silence that followed on the line was heavy. Then the operator's voice returned, tight with urgency, asking her name, age, and address. Emma gave the details in halting whispers, her throat dry, her hands shaking so hard the receiver nearly fell from her grasp. As she waited, Max growled again, louder this time, as footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. It was only a drunken neighbor stumbling past, muttering curses, but Max's fierce barking startled him into retreat, his curses fading as he staggered away. The barking, however, carried beyond the walls, cutting through the night like an alarm. It reached ears that mattered, the approaching patrol car already weaving through Detroit's streets. Emma did not know it yet, but Max's warning had drawn the police faster toward their apartment, toward the truth that was about to unfold. The howl of the wind outside mingled with the faint wail of sirens growing closer, their sound climbing up through the iron skeleton of the apartment building. Emma Miller pressed the receiver hard against her ear, her small knuckles white as she tried to keep listening to the calm but firm voice of the 911 operator. The woman's tone was even, steady, like the metronome of a piano piece. "Stay near the phone, sweetheart. Officers are on their way. You've been very brave." Emma nodded, though no one could see it, her trembling frame pressed against the peeling wall of the living room. The door to Lily's room remained locked, the strip of light underneath now a dull shadow. Max, the German shepherd, had positioned himself firmly before it. His ears were pricked high, his amber eyes gleaming in the dim light, chest rising and falling in sharp rhythm. He did not bark again, but emitted a low growl that vibrated in Emma's chest each time she dared to step closer. To her young mind, Max wasn't just a dog anymore. He was a sentinel, carved from muscle and loyalty, holding back the dark. Suddenly, the apartment door rattled with hurried knocks. A commanding voice followed. "Detroit Police!" "Open up." Emma jumped, startled, then darted to unlatch the chain and turn the lock. The heavy door swung inward, and two uniformed officers entered. The first was Officer Daniel Carter, a man in his early 40s with broad shoulders and a weather-beaten face. His hair was close-cropped, flecked with gray, and his jawline carried a day's worth of stubble. Years in the force had given him a stern appearance, but his eyes were not cold. They were sharp, observant, and carried a weight of compassion that lingered longer than his words. He had built a reputation in his precinct for being patient with children during domestic calls, perhaps because he had grown up in foster care himself and understood the silent language of fear. His partner was Officer Megan O'Connell, younger, maybe late 20s, with auburn hair tucked neatly under her cap. She had a slender frame and a quick, purposeful stride. Megan had only been with the department for 3 years, but had already shown herself to be fiercely dedicated. She carried a softer demeanor compared to Carter, her voice often warm and encouraging even in tense situations. Growing up the eldest of 5 siblings in a crowded Irish-American household, she had a knack for comforting children, speaking to them in tones that made them feel seen rather than small. Emma stared up at them with wide eyes, clutching Lily's teddy bear against her chest. "She's in there," Emma whispered, pointing toward the locked door. He locked the door." Her lips trembled, words threatening to dissolve into tears. Officer Carter crouched slightly to meet Emma's gaze. "You did the right thing calling us," he said softly, his gravelly voice low enough that it seemed meant just for her. "Can you tell me your name?" "Emma," she whispered. Carter gave a nod, standing again. His eyes shifted to the closed bedroom door. "All right, Emma. We'll take it from here." Max gave a warning bark when Carter approached the bedroom. His body stiffened, tail rigid. Carter held out his hand cautiously. "Easy, boy," he murmured, reading the protective stance of the animal. Emma hurried forward, stroking Max's back. "It's okay, Max." "They're here to help." The dog's growl subsided into silence, though his eyes never left the door. From down the hall came the hurried footsteps of Sophia Miller, just returning from her night shift at the diner. She was still in her uniform, a pale blue dress with a white apron streaked faintly with grease stains. Her hair, usually tied tightly back, had loosened, stray strands clinging to her flushed face. She clutched her purse strap so tightly that her knuckles whitened. "Emma!" she gasped, rushing forward, scooping the trembling girl into her arms. "What happened? Why are the police here?" Her voice cracked with both exhaustion and panic. Emma buried her face in her mother's chest. "He locked Lily in. I heard her crying." Sophia's eyes darted from Emma to the officers, then to the door. Fear drained the color from her face, leaving it pale as parchment. She reached for the doorknob, but Carter held out a firm hand. "Ma'am, step back. We'll handle this inside the room." Muffled sounds could be heard, the shifting of sheets, the faint clink of glass against wood, and a man's tired voice. "Hold still, Lily. Just a little more water." Officer O'Connell pressed her ear to the door, listening, while Carter tried the knob. "Locked," he muttered. He knocked hard. "Robert Hayes. This is the Detroit Police. Open the door now." For a moment, silence answered. Then the lock turned slowly. The door opened just a crack, revealing Robert standing in the frame. His shirt was damp near the collar, his dark hair sticking to his forehead. There were circles beneath his eyes as though sleep had abandoned him long ago. He looked at the officers without speaking, then shifted his gaze to Sophia, who stood frozen in the hallway. "I was cooling her fever," Robert said, his voice flat, low, almost weary. "She's burning up. I didn't do anything wrong." Behind him, Lily could be seen lying on the bed, cheeks crimson with heat, strands of hair plastered to her damp skin. A glass of water and a bottle of children's medicine rested on the nightstand. Carter's tone remained steady. "Step aside, sir. We need to check on her." Robert hesitated, jaw tightening, but eventually stepped back with his palms open. Max pushed forward slightly, his body tense until Emma caught his collar. The officers entered, O'Connell immediately kneeling beside Lily to check her breathing and skin temperature. Carter stood near Robert, his eyes sharp, scanning for any sign of aggression. Sophia tried to rush past them to reach Lily, but Carter lifted a hand. "One moment, ma'am. Let my partner assess her first." Sophia's chest heaved with restrained panic. She looked at Robert, her eyes filled with suspicion and betrayal. Why was the door locked? Robert's gaze flicked toward her, then away. She was restless. "I didn't want Emma barging in and waking her more. The light, it helps her sleep." His words stumbled as though assembled without care. Emma clutched her mother's apron, whispering, "He slammed it shut." I heard it. The hallway thickened with tension, the flickering bulb above sputtering weakly. In the distance, the sound of another siren faded into silence. O'Connell looked up from Lily. "She's got a high fever. Breathing's steady but shallow. We need paramedics to make sure she doesn't dehydrate." She spoke into her radio quickly, calling for medical support. At that moment, Max broke from Emma's grasp and padded toward Lily's bedside. He sniffed her forehead, then lay down directly beside her, pressing his warm body against her tiny frame. Lily's trembling hand reached out weakly to clutch his fur, her lips forming a faint word. "Max." The officers exchanged a glance. Sometimes animals told truths humans failed to. As Sophia finally moved to kneel by her daughter's side, another figure appeared in the hallway. Mrs. Alvarez, a neighbor from 2 floors below. She was a stout woman in her late 50s with silver hair tied into a bun and glasses that constantly slid down her nose. She wore a long wool coat and carried a shopping bag filled with groceries. Drawn by the noise and the flashing police lights outside, she had come upstairs. "Is everything all right?" I heard shouting, she asked, her voice husky but concerned. Mrs. Alvarez was known in the building as a busybody, but not unkind. She always had spare soup for sick neighbors, though her sharp tongue made her seem sterner than she intended. "Please step back, ma'am," Carter said firmly, though not unkindly. Mrs. Alvarez's eyes darted from Emma to Robert to the officers, suspicion etching itself into her frown. She didn't speak again, but lingered in the hallway, listening. The room grew heavy with the clash of words unsaid, the uncertainty of truth. Sophia stroked Lily's damp hair while staring daggers at Robert. Emma clung to Max, her small fingers twisting into his thick fur. Carter radioed for EMS again, his voice a steady anchor amid the storm. The sirens that had once been distant now cut sharply into the night air outside the building, echoing up the stairwell. Red and blue light flashed across the peeling walls, coloring every fearful face in the hallway. The closed door had opened, but in its wake it left questions that no one yet dared to answer. The Detroit night bled into dawn by the time the Miller family found themselves under the harsh fluorescent lights of the 12th Precinct station. The air inside was different from the chill of the apartment hallway. It smelled of stale coffee, paper, and the faint tang of disinfectant. The hum of old heaters mixed with the clatter of typewriters and murmured conversations. It was a place where stories fractured under questioning and where truth and fear were forced to sit across from one another. Emma sat on a chair far too big for her, her thin legs dangling, her sneakers tapping nervously against the metal frame. Her long brown hair, still tangled from the night, framed a face pale with exhaustion. She clutched Lily's teddy bear, its worn ear pressed against her cheek, as though the fabric might shield her from the cold stares of the adults around her. Beside her, Sophia wrapped a protective arm around both daughters, though her own face betrayed cracks of uncertainty. Robert Hayes was seated across the room, guarded by an officer. His shoulders were hunched, his dark hair damp as though he had splashed water on his face in the bathroom. He looked at no one in particular, his gaze fixed on a faint scratch along the interrogation table, his lips pressed thin. The officer assigned to the interrogation was Detective Sarah Whitman, a woman in her mid-50s with a tall, angular build. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back into a no-nonsense bun, and her piercing gray eyes seemed to strip away pretense. Years on the job had carved fine lines into her face, not from laughter, but from long nights chasing shadows of crime across the city. She had grown up in a troubled neighborhood herself, the daughter of a mother who worked 3 jobs and a father who disappeared when she was 10. That past had hardened her, but it had also made her fiercely protective of children. She saw them as the most honest witnesses, even when their words were clouded by fear. Sarah sat across from Robert, a yellow notepad open in front of her. Her voice was calm but carried the steel of authority. "Mr. Hayes, walk me through what happened last night from the moment Sophia left for work." Robert rubbed his hands together, his knuckles pale. The girls were asleep. Around midnight, Lily woke up with a fever. I gave her some medicine, tried to keep her cool with a towel, that's all. I locked the door so Emma wouldn't come in and get scared. His tone was flat, defensive but not heated, like a man repeating the same justification to himself as much as to others. Sarah leaned back, studying him. You understand how that looked from the outside? Door locked. A 7-year-old calling 911 in tears, neighbors reporting bruises on the younger child in the past. That paints a picture. Mr. Hayes Roberts' jaw tightened. I didn't hurt her. While Roberts spoke, Emma sat with Officer Megan O'Connell in a smaller adjacent room. Megan crouched to Emma's eye level, her auburn hair slipping loose from beneath her cap. She set a box of crayons and a blank sheet of paper on the table. Sometimes it's easier to draw than to talk, she said gently. Emma hesitated, then pressed the stub of a black crayon hard against the page, outlining a door. Her strokes grew darker, heavier, until the crayon tip broke. Megan didn't flinch, only slid another crayon forward. That door feels heavy, doesn't it? She asked softly. Emma nodded without meeting her eyes. Meanwhile, Sophia sat with Sergeant Luis Ramirez, a stocky man in his late 40s with a kind face that contrasted with his intimidating frame. He had dark hair thinning at the crown, a thick mustache, and eyes that softened whenever he looked at the children. Luis had 3 kids of his own, and his protective instinct often bled into his work. He spoke gently to Sophia, offering her a styrofoam cup of coffee she barely touched. I know this is overwhelming, he said, but we need clarity. Do you trust Robert with your children? Sophia's fingers tightened around the cup. Her chestnut hair was disheveled from rushing straight from work. I thought I did. He's quiet, awkward. He doesn't show much affection, but he's never crossed a line. Still. Her eyes flicked toward Emma, clutching the teddy bear. When my daughter says something like that, how can I ignore it? Luis nodded slowly. No parent wants to ignore a cry for help. But no parent wants to wrongly condemn someone either. That's why we dig back in the interrogation room. Detective Whitman tapped her pen against the notepad. Robert, your stepdaughter claims she saw you remove her sister's nightgown. Did you? No, Robert's voice cracked, his eyes flashing with sudden fire. I moved the strap back up. It had fallen. She's sick. That's it. He slammed a fist softly against the table, more desperation than aggression. Sarah didn't flinch. Why did you slam the door on Emma? Robert's breathing grew uneven. Because she looked at me like I was a monster. Like him. His voice broke, the pronoun hanging in the air like a ghost. Like who? Sarah pressed. Robert's gaze fell. Her real father. His tone carried no venom, only weariness, as though he had lived too long under someone else's shadow. At that moment, the door opened and Mrs. Johnson, the elderly neighbor, was escorted in to provide a statement. She was a frail woman with wispy white hair, a knitted shawl around her shoulders, and trembling hands that clutched her purse like a lifeline. She spoke softly, almost apologetically. I saw little Lily with bruises before. I thought she might have fallen, but after last night I worried it was more. Her watery eyes shifted from Robert to the detective, then to Sophia, who sat in silence. The weight of her words pressed the room into quiet. Emma, hearing her voice from the adjacent room, gripped the teddy bear tighter. Max, lying at her feet, raised his head, ears flicking at the tension even he could sense through walls. The silence shattered when a young man with a camera and notepad entered the lobby, flashing a press badge. Ethan Blake, a local journalist in his late 20s, had sharp features, messy blonde hair, and an eager glint in his eyes. He had been covering community issues for the Detroit Free Press. Drawn by the police chatter over radio, he smelled a story. Though told to wait outside, he scribbled notes furiously, catching snippets of statements that would soon feed tomorrow's headlines. The police station became a web of conflicting truths, a man insisting innocence, a child haunted by past shadows, a mother torn between belief and doubt, neighbors whispering suspicions, and a journalist circling like a hawk. Detective Whitman knew this was the delicate balance where justice could be made or broken. She closed her notebook with a soft snap. Until we review the surveillance footage from the building, this remains open. Mr. Hayes, you'll stay under watch. Sophia pulled Emma close, her hand trembling as it brushed hair from her daughter's face. Emma whispered into her mother's sleeve. "Mom, it looked just like before." Sophia closed her eyes, fighting back tears. The phrase, "just like before," echoed, cutting through every other sound in the station. Outside, dawn painted Detroit's skyline in muted pinks and grays. The city was waking up, unaware that within the walls of a precinct, one family's fragile trust hung by a thread, waiting for evidence, waiting for answers. The surveillance room of the Detroit precinct was dim, its walls humming with the steady vibration of machines. Screens lined the wall in staggered rows, each one showing a different slice of the apartment building where the Millers lived. The air smelled faintly of burnt dust from the old heaters and of cheap coffee that had sat too long. Inside, Detective Sarah Whitman leaned forward with her arms crossed, her sharp gray eyes narrowed at the grainy footage rolling across the monitors. Beside her stood Officer Harold Green, the precinct's longtime technician. Green was in his early 60s with thinning white hair and wire-framed glasses that slipped down the ridge of his nose whenever he bent toward a keyboard. His back was slightly stooped from decades of hunching over monitors, and his plaid shirt bore stains of ink and machine oil. Though outwardly gruff, Green was known for his patience when combing through endless hours of footage. Years earlier, he had missed a crucial frame on a case involving a runaway child, an oversight that still haunted him. So now he inspected every flicker of tape as if someone's life depended on it. The screen showed Robert entering the kitchen, his movements hurried but precise. He opened a drawer, pulled out a towel, then unscrewed a bottle of children's fever medicine. Sarah's pen tapped slowly against her notebook. "So far, consistent with his statement," she muttered. Sophia sat stiffly in a plastic chair at the back of the room, her eyes swollen from sleeplessness. Emma leaned against her, clutching Lily's teddy bear. Max lay curled at Emma's feet, though his head lifted whenever Robert's figure appeared on the screens. His ears flicked, and a soft rumble would vibrate through his chest. Another officer entered, Lieutenant Carla Simmons, mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, her curly black hair cropped short around her face. Carla had a commanding presence, her deep voice filling the room even when she spoke quietly. Having grown up as the daughter of a police sergeant in Chicago, she carried herself with a mix of discipline and empathy. She had a reputation for balancing firmness with fairness, often taking on roles that required both. "Any signs of misconduct yet?" she asked, her eyes scanning the monitors. Green rewound the footage, enlarging a different angle. The hallway camera 1, tucked near the stairwell that many tenants forgot existed, showed Emma moving quietly through the corridor, picking up Lily's teddy bear before peeking into the bedroom. Then the view cut, the door slamming shut, Emma flinching back. Emma's small voice broke the silence. "That's what I saw." He slammed it. Sarah crouched beside her. "You're very brave for telling us, Emma. But I want you to look carefully. Sometimes our memories mix with old ones. Do you see exactly what happened here?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head, pointing at the screen. "It was just like before." Her words trembled, pulling Sophia's heart into knots. Lieutenant Simmons exchanged a glance with Sarah. "We'll need professional assessment. Trauma can overlay reality." At that moment, Ethan Blake, the young journalist, leaned against the doorway with his notepad. His blonde hair was unkempt, his coat dusted with early snow from outside. He wasn't supposed to be in the surveillance room, but Carla hadn't thrown him out yet. "If I may," he said, his tone cautious but insistent. "Whether Robert is guilty or not, this story will highlight one thing. Children believe their fears because of what they've lived. People need to understand that Sarah shot him a warning look. You're here as an observer. Do not interfere with the investigation." "Still," Ethan scribbled quickly, his sharp eyes darting between Emma and the screen. The footage rolled again. This time, it showed Robert stepping into Lily's room. He placed the towel above her forehead, careful not to touch her skin, letting the coolness drift downward. The angle cut off at the edge of the bed, leaving uncertainty. Sophia exhaled sharply. "It looks like he didn't touch her. But why lock the door?" "That's what we're trying to answer," Sarah replied. As the officers debated, Max suddenly rose to his feet, ears pricked, tail stiff. He walked toward the door of the surveillance room and growled softly. A moment later, a new figure entered. Dr. Karen Ellis, a child psychologist called in by Lieutenant Simmons. Dr. Ellis was in her early 40s, with shoulder-length dark hair streaked with auburn and warm hazel eyes behind round glasses. She wore a charcoal cardigan and carried a leather satchel worn smooth at the edges. Known in Detroit for her trauma work with foster children, she radiated calm authority. "Sorry to intrude," she said, her voice low but steady. "I was asked to evaluate the girl." Emma pressed closer to her mother, wary of the stranger. Dr. Ellis knelt slowly so her eyes met Emma's. "You don't have to say anything right away," she said. "Sometimes drawing or playing helps more than talking. Would you like me to sit with you while you hold your bear?" Her tone carried no pressure, only gentle invitation. Emma nodded faintly, clutching the teddy bear tighter. Max settled beside her again, as though giving approval. While Emma began sketching another door on a sheet of paper, the adults turned back to the footage. Detective Whitman scribbled notes, her lips tightening. "We can't convict a man on shadows, but we can't ignore a child's terror either." Lieutenant Simmons crossed her arms. "Until we have clearer evidence, Robert stays under watch." Meanwhile, Dr. Ellis will work with Emma. Maybe her drawings will reveal what words can't. Outside, the city stirred awake. Snow flurries danced against the gray morning light filtering through the blinds. The hum of the heaters grew louder, a reminder of the cold pressing against the station's brick walls. Ethan Blake snapped a photograph of the monitors with his small camera, ignoring Sarah's sharp glare. He whispered to himself, "The headline writes itself, truth in shadows." The chapter of doubt closed not with certainty but with more questions. The image of Robert hovering with the towel remained frozen on the screen, neither proof of guilt nor of innocence. Emma's whispered refrain, "just like before," echoed through every corner of the precinct. And somewhere in the silence between memory and evidence, the fragile balance of a family's future trembled. The therapy center was located in a renovated townhouse on the east side of Detroit. Its brick walls painted a warm cream, and the entrance framed by potted evergreens dusted with snow. Inside, the air smelled faintly of crayons, coffee, and floor polish, and the heat spread evenly through hidden vents. It felt more like a small community library than a clinic. In the waiting area, Emma clutched her teddy bear while Max sat pressed against her legs, his black and tan coat gleaming under the light. His amber eyes scanned the room, alert but calm, as if he too sensed this was a place where guarded hearts could finally soften. Detective Sarah Whitman accompanied them, though she kept a respectful distance. Sarah was a tall, lean woman in her 40s, her short-cropped dark hair touched with gray at the edges. She wore a fitted navy coat and practical boots, her posture rigid from years of police work. Her stern appearance often intimidated witnesses, but beneath her steel exterior was someone who had once nearly lost her younger brother to an abusive foster father. That old trauma still colored the way she listened to children. It made her both sharp and quietly protective. The therapist, Dr. Karen Ellis, emerged from her office, her warm hazel eyes crinkling as she smiled. She gestured them in. "Come, Emma. Max can join us too." Dogs are often the best assistants in therapy. Emma's mother Sophia followed, carrying Lily, who was still weak from fever but more stable. Robert was escorted by Lieutenant Carla Simmons, his wrists free now, but his movements measured as though he expected every gesture to be judged. He looked drawn, his dark hair unkempt, the lines under his eyes deeper than ever. He sat gingerly in a chair near the corner, hands clasped as if to stop them from trembling. Inside the therapy room, the walls were pastel shades of blue and yellow, lined with shelves of children's books, puzzles, and trays of colored pencils. A low wooden table occupied the center, already set with blank paper. A small cactus in a chipped pot sat by the window, catching what little daylight filtered through the cloudy sky. Dr. Ellis guided Emma to the table. "You can draw if you like, or you can just sit and listen. There's no rush." Emma nodded, opening a green crayon and sketching the outline of a hallway. Max lay down beside her chair, his ears pricked toward every sound. Robert cleared his throat. "I just want to say—" "Not yet," Dr. Ellis interrupted gently. "This space is for listening first, not defending." Lieutenant Simmons crossed her arms, standing by the wall like a sentinel. Sarah took a seat beside Sophia, notebook in her lap. Dr. Ellis turned to Emma. "When you think of that night, what comes to your mind first?" Emma pressed harder on the crayon until the paper nearly tore. "The door," she whispered. "Good," Dr. Ellis said softly. "Not good that you're scared, but good that you can name it. Now let's make a rule together. At home, before anyone opens a door, they knock and say who they are. That way, the door won't feel like a trap." She looked at Robert. "Would you agree to that?" Robert nodded quickly, his voice hoarse. I'll knock. Always Sophia shifted uneasily, brushing Lily's hair back. We should all do it. Even me. Even Emma when she goes into her sister's room. Emma glanced at her mother, surprised, then gave a small nod. Dr. Ellis wrote the word knock on a card in bold letters and taped it to the wall. This is the first rule. As the session continued, Emma drew another picture, a shadow standing by the door. Her small hand hesitated before she wrote a single word under it, Dad. Robert's face tightened, pain flickering across his features. Before he could speak, the door opened quietly, and a new figure entered. Mrs. Alvarez, an attorney from the neighborhood. She was in her early 50s, plump with warm brown skin, her hair streaked silver and tied back in a bun. She wore a dark green coat dusted with snow and carried a wicker basket with oatmeal cookies wrapped in wax paper. Her voice was husky but kind. I apologize for intruding. I wanted to speak about starting a listening group here in the community center. Parents and children together, a place where voices don't get dismissed. Dr. Ellis welcomed her. Perfect timing, Mrs. Alvarez. We were just discussing rules of safety. Mrs. Alvarez placed the basket on the table, the buttery smell filling the room. Emma looked up, her eyes softening. She reached for a cookie, then hesitated until Max nudged her hand with his nose. Only then did she take one, nibbling quietly. Sophia exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing for the first time in days. A community group. Maybe that's what we need. Not just rules at home, but people outside who will listen, Sarah added, her tone firm. Children deserve to be heard long before it escalates to a 911 call. If you can build this group, I'll push for police liaisons to attend. Lieutenant Simmons gave a short nod of agreement. The session continued with Dr. Ellis encouraging each family member to state one safe action. Robert, his voice shaking, promised to announce every step he took. I'm getting medicine now. I'm turning on the light. Sophia pledged to stop dismissing Emma's fears as exaggerations. Emma whispered that she would use a word, door, whenever the memories grew too loud, so her family would know to pause and listen. When the session ended, Robert bent to pick up a pencil Emma had dropped. He handed it back carefully, leaving space between their fingers. Here you go, he said softly. Emma took it without pulling away. It was the smallest gesture, but in that quiet room, it felt like the first plank laid on a fragile bridge. Outside, snow had begun to fall more heavily, frosting the windows. Max stood at the door, tail wagging, as if signaling that something light had entered the house again. For the first time in many nights, when the family left the therapy center together, Emma holding Sophia's hand, Robert walking a pace behind, and Max trotting protectively at their side, the air around them no longer felt suffocating. It felt like the beginning of healing, fragile but real. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not flashes of light from the sky, but the quiet changes inside a family's heart. God reminds us that even in the coldest nights, love can be reborn when we choose to listen, to forgive, and to stand together. Emma's tears, Robert's trembling voice, Sophia's courage, and even Max's loyal presence are proof that God places signs of hope in our lives every day. In our own lives, we may not face the exact same storm, but each of us has doors that feel heavy, shadows that seem too strong. Remember this, with faith, patience, and God's guidance, every door can open to light again. If this story touched your heart, share it so others may find strength. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us by subscribing for more stories of faith and hope, and let us pray together for all families, that no child's cry goes unheard. May God bless you and your loved ones today and always. Type Amen in the comments if you believe in God's miracles and the healing power of love.